Thank you. He said that because he knows what I'm going to talk about today. So, my title today is The Quest for Authenticity. And I want to tell you what gave me the inspiration to do it. Craig let us borrow a book called The Knight in Rusty Armor. And that's what gave me the idea. That and the fact Becky and I had a misunderstanding because she told me one day, I told Craig you'd base a talk on that book. And when I told her you did, she said, well, I didn't really mean it like that. But anyway, I had already called him and told him I'm going to do a talk based on the book you let us borrow. And it's pretty thin. And for those of you like Carol, it doesn't have pictures, I'm sorry. Aww. But anyway, it's really a really good book that speaks about authenticity in a very whimsical way. So the story is about a knight, and you never find out his name reading the book, but he loves being a knight. He loves going on different crusades, and he loves rescuing damsels, and it's who he is, and he's really good at it. And he's married, his wife's name is Juliet, and he's got a son named Christopher, and he loves being a knight so much that he starts to wear his armor around the house. And he wears it all the time, and eventually he loves it so much he never takes it off. He wears his armor 24/7, wears it everywhere, has to lift up the front to eat, wears it to bed. And after about 2 years of this, Juliet, I thought about this, Juliet kind of has a come to Jesus meeting with him, but I guess you'd call it a come to Merlin meeting with him in those days. And she sits down and she says to him, Christopher and I can't take this anymore. We don't know who you are. And unless you take the armor off, I'm going to take Christopher and I'm leaving. And our knight, he thinks about it for a long time because he really loves being a knight. And he decides he's got to take his armor off. And he starts to take it off, and it won't come off. There's nothing he can do to get it off. So he goes to see the strongest man in town. And he can't do anything with it either. He says, I'm tired today, come back tomorrow. And can't get it off. And so I can't cover the whole book, but basically somebody tells him you need to go see Merlin. And so he goes and he sees Merlin, and Merlin says, I can help you. And he shows him a picture, and it's a mountain really high and steep. And Merlin says, that's the summit of truth. And you've got to climb that mountain and reach the top before you're free of your armor. And actually, I'll just tell you this because I didn't cover it. As he does what I'm about to tell you, pieces of the armor do come off. And the knight doesn't want to do this because it looks really tough, and to climb this mountain with all his armor is going to be an ordeal. And there are 3 castles that he has to stop by on the way to the summit of truth. And finally, he agrees to do it because he doesn't want to lose his family. And the first castle is the Castle of Silence. And he goes in, and it's very dark, and there's a big room. And eventually he sees his king in there. And his king, he said, I'm surprised. And his king says, every once in a while when I tell people I'm going away, I come and I make this trip because it helps me find who I am. And so our knight says, that's great, you and I could do this together. And the knight says, no, I'm afraid we can't. And he says to him, one must be alone to drop one's armor. And in this Castle of Silence, he goes to different rooms, and each one is smaller and smaller. And I forgot to say, he's making this trip with a squirrel and a pigeon too. And he asks out loud, why are each room getting smaller? And a voice says to him, because in each room you're getting closer and closer to who you are. And he has this realization that his entire life, he's never listened. He's never listened to anybody. And he hears a voice, and he wonders who this voice is. And he comes to the realization, it's his voice. It's his voice. And he's never even stopped to listen to his voice. And for the first time, he's listening to his intuition and his inner wisdom. And when he gets all of that, the castle disappears, and the three of them go along their path until they come to the second castle, which is the castle of knowledge. And he goes in there, and one of the realizations that he has is that for his entire life, he's mistaken love for need. He thinks he loves Juliet and Christopher, and one of the realizations he has is he needs them. He needs their love because he's never loved himself. So he needs other people to love him. And he comes to understand that if he can't love himself, he can't really love anybody else. And then he comes to a mirror, and it's a mirror that shows what he really looks like. And he looks in the mirror, and he says to the squirrel and the pigeon, "That isn't me." And they said, "Yeah, it is you." And what he sees in the mirror is a charming, vital person whose eyes shine with compassion and love. And what he's seeing is the real him. He's seeing his potential for who he could be. And he's seeing the one who lives beneath the armor that he's set up, someone who's beautiful and innocent and perfect. And when he really gets in touch with that castle goes away, and they go on the path again, and they come to the third castle, which is the castle of will and daring. And when he gets there and he starts to walk across this drawbridge, out comes the biggest, meanest dragon that he's ever seen. And he says, "Well, I've killed lots of dragons." And the dragon says, "You haven't killed anybody like me before." And when he gets close, he gets really scared and he runs back. And the squirrel and the pigeon say, "You got to do it." And he says, "I can't do this." And they convince him to go again. He goes again and comes back again. And finally, the third time, he's embarrassed at how scared he is. He goes forward right to the dragon, and when he does, the dragon disappears. And the point is, like the dragon is an illusion, so are all our doubts and our fears. They're illusions. And when he goes to the dragon and the dragon disappears, the castle disappears. And so this is I could have read you the book, huh? So the last phase is the summit of truth, the top of the mountain. And they start to make the trip, and there's a huge boulder in the way. And he holds on to the boulder because if he lets go, there's a chasm that he's going to fall down. And he realizes either he lets go or he can never he's got to trust. And finally, he does let go, and he starts to fall. And as he's falling, he comes to the realization that all his life, he was the cause of everything that happened. He wasn't the effect, he was the cause. And as soon as he realizes that, he falls, this is what the author said, he falls up. And he falls up, and his willingness to face the unknown has set him free. And he reaches the top of the mountain, and he becomes one with all the universe, and he realizes that he is love. And that's basically, did I do a good job? That's basically the story.
Story time.
So Carolyn Mays, who's a writer, asked the question, why does God want me? And why have I been called? And she answers it by saying, God calls us. We're called to move inward so we could move outward into the world. And you know, what she's saying is when we know who we are and when we realize our oneness with Spirit, we can then move out into the world. And Ernest Holmes wrote, when we become conscious of our oneness with universal good, which is universal God, beliefs in evil, sin, sickness, limitation, and death tend to disappear. So Eric Butterworth said that we're not here to make the world right. Humans aren't here to make the world right. We're here to see rightly. And that's when we see rightly, we can move from illusion to heaven. And he said, you know, everything starts within ourselves by changing the way we see the world. And we need to develop a spiritually oriented insight that will lead us to a positive and creating and loving outlook. So I want to tell you a story and a fable. And the story, I'm going to start with the story, and the story is a true story. It's about a doctor who's an ER doctor, and he's on duty one night, and they bring a woman in labor, and they realize they don't have time to get her doctor, so he's going to have to deliver the baby. And it's something he's done many, many times, so it doesn't faze him. Well, he delivers the baby, and while he's cleaning the mucus out of the baby's mouth, she opens her eyes, and she looks right at him. And he realizes he's the first human being this child has ever seen. Isn't that really cool? I've thought about that. So I've read this story before. To be the first, to realize you're the first person she's ever seen. And when he realizes that, this is a guy who's done tons of births, and he always sees them as a technical challenge and all the issues. He loves doing them. But this one was different. When this little girl opened up her eyes, it opened up his heart. And he saw it in a whole different way. And it's different because he was there not just as a technician, but he was there as a human being also. So the fable I want to tell you is about in the 14th century, some stonemasons are being interviewed about their job. And they ask the first guy, and he says, he's very bitter, and he says, I've been turning stone into blocks for my whole life. I've done it when I was young, and I'm gonna do it until I die. The second stonemason smiles and has a much warmer attitude, and he said, I do this to make a living for my family, so my children can go to school and my children can have clothes, and I do it so my wife has a home where we can raise our children in love. And the third stonemason, when they ask him, he talks about it being the privilege of being part of building a cathedral that's going to last for thousands and thousands of years. And the point of the story and the point of the fable is that all three of them and the doc are doing things that they've done many times before, but finding meaning in what we do, even if it's a familiar task, can give us a sense of joy and gratitude in our life. You know, there's a Bible story where God offers Solomon anything he wants. And Solomon asks for wisdom. And God says to him that because you've asked for wisdom, I'm going to give you wisdom and knowledge and riches beyond what anybody before you has ever had and anybody that comes after you is ever going to have. Because that wisdom, God realizes when he asks for wisdom that he's asking for it to rule his people with love and compassion and caring. And so the Webster's definition of wisdom is knowledge and the capacity to make the use of it. And I read this years ago from another minister, Edward Villiam from Santa Rosa, and he said the difference between knowledge and wisdom is knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. The point of it is, once you know what to do with what you have, the universe can give you more of it. So once you can have all of this knowledge, but once you have the wisdom to know what to do with it, the universe provides us with more and more. And the quest isn't some magical thing that comes to some of us, but not others. If we want to be wise, if we make the choice, we need to make the choice to do so and then act on it. So Greg Lavoie wrote a book titled Callings. And in the book, he says one of his friends is a college professor. And he's got a 7-year-old daughter. And one day she asks him, they're having breakfast, I think, and she says, so what do you do? What do you do? And he says to her, I teach people how to draw. And she looks at him wide-eyed and says, you mean they forget? And the point is, in our life as adults, we do. We forget who we are. And our spiritual path, as we move along it, is to remember. So I'm not exactly sure how to say his name, but I've read his books. Paulo Coelho. Somebody asks him one day, what would you like your epitaph to be? And he says he wants his epitaph to say, Paulo Coelho died while he was alive. And this person has that reaction, says, so what? We all die when we're alive. And Paulo says, no, that isn't true. When we live doing the same repeated act over and over again, we're not alive. And he said, being alive means willing to take risks. Being alive, bless you, being alive is to do something that sometimes scares you. To die is to get rid of old values and to move to a place we don't know. So I want to read you a quote from Rachel Remen, who said, even more than our experiences, our beliefs become our prison. But we carry on, when we carry our healing, let me start again. Even more than our experiences, our beliefs become our prisons. But we carry our own healing within us, even into the darkest of inner places. The Course in Miracles says, when I have forgiven myself and remembered who I am, I will bless everyone and everything I see. The way to freedom often lies through an open heart. So that was going to be the end of my message. Until yesterday afternoon, I saw something on Facebook that I don't even remember which one of my friends wrote it, but they said, when I watched this commercial, I cried. And so I had to watch it, right? And I cried. And it's about somebody, to be really honest, that I'm not a big fan of. It's about Dwayne Wade, who's a really great basketball player. And I never liked him because he never played for one of my teams. And I always thought he was a dirty player, to be really honest. And I, after I saw it, I called Becky in and I said, take a look at this commercial about Dwayne Wade. And she sat down, it's only about 3 minutes long. And after like a minute, she was like me, we're both sitting there crying, watching it. And Becky turned to me, she's getting red already. She turned to me and she said, you gotta end your talk with this. This is just perfect. It's a Budweiser commercial, but it's about authenticity. So that's how we'll end today.